Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Do you believe this? The Sunday cycle of readings follows a 3-year cycle. So every 3 years, on the 5th Sunday of Lent, we hear this reading of the raising of Lazarus. I suppose we could call it a minor resurrection because it precedes Jesus' major resurrection, which is the resurrection. But still, it is the climax of a series of 7 signs and 7 miracles that we see in the Gospel of John. But we hear this reading every 3 years as a church throughout the world. And so, looking at the past 3 years, I'd like to look at this particular gospel reading of year A, the year 2023, as kind of bookend readings, considering what we have gone through over the last 3 years since the last time we heard this reading, and what was going on the last time we heard this reading. Oh, that's right. We didn't hear this reading. 3 years ago, we were in lockdown. We were closed down. I think we were in like the 6th week of the 2-week lockdown period. We were preaching to empty churches. No one was responding. People were at home, locked down, locked in, terrified, some to the point of paranoia because of a disease that was ending in death. And so, granted, I was preaching to an online audience, even if it was to an empty church. And every now and again, we like to have a little fun with the Gospels and the stories, like, what are some of these details we'd like to throw in? For example, the wedding at Cana. What exactly was the vintage of the wine that Jesus produced with the water? It couldn't have been a white wine, of course. Hopefully it was a California wine. Certainly not a Pinot Noir. It had to be a bold red, like a Cab or a Merlot. We have fun with things like that. What would be the best of wines? And of course, the best wine is always from home, wherever that is. Well, at the same time, we look at Lazarus, who had a sickness, who had a disease that ended in death. And so what disease could it have been? Could it possibly have been COVID? Did he get it because of a pandemic? Did he catch it because he was not exercising social distancing or wearing a mask? Did he get it because he refused to get the vaccine, or, considering how things turned out, because he got the vaccine? And again, I don't want to downplay or make light of the devastation that this disease caused over the last 3 years. Many of you perhaps might have known someone who was seriously affected by it. Not only people who were sick and died, but how many people's businesses were destroyed because of it. Their livelihoods and their living were destroyed because of the exaggerated way in which it was handled. I certainly don't want to downplay that. But the question to ask is, where are we now? Because at that time it certainly was a sickness that had caused a death. A physical, literal death in many, but certainly a spiritual death in many of us as a church and as a society. And how far have we come over these last 3 years as we again hear this story of a sickness that was to end not in death, but in the glory of God, so that the glory of God will be revealed and ultimately result in the resurrection of Lazarus, as Jesus told him to come forth after removing the stone from the tomb. Fortunately, many of us have moved on. Just looking out, we don't see too many masks anymore. We see people going to work. We see people going out. I made any number of flights over the last summer, taking 6 weeks off, preparing for the 2 parishes I'd be administering this year. Only a handful of people were wearing masks on the plane, but people were living again. They were traveling again, and it's good to see. Even here at St. Patrick's, the school closed for the remainder of that year, but opened up in a limited way and access for people who still wanted to stay home. But they were here. They were in business. We did our best to get on with life, even as we were taking precautions. But even now, where are we? Especially as we're hearing that, maybe 90% of all COVID cases in the hospitals were in the hospital for something else and died of something else, but tested positive for COVID. We're hearing perhaps the exaggerations, and perhaps the vaccine wasn't working quite as well as we thought it would. But as many of us are still gone forward, we still see others caught in the throes of a spiritual death. For example, on occasion, we still might see someone walking outside, even on a windy day, by themselves, wearing a mask. My favorites are those who are driving their cars by themselves, still wearing the mask. But I also know of a couple, older couple, in good health, or at least used to be, who are still in complete lockdown mode, who are still terrified to go out. The only people who see them are through social media and FaceTime and Zoom. Their food is ordered and brought in, and they sanitize everything that comes in the house. They are still in that tomb. The stone has still not been moved from the entrance. Then, of course, there were those who were just smug about the whole thing. People who forget that those who are hard of hearing need to see the mouth, but that doesn't matter. You can just see it in their eyes, the smug satisfaction that they get of telling you, no, I am not going to take off my mask. People who insist on keeping themselves or others in a state of concern. I'll keep my mask on because that's my comfort zone. Forget that others people's comfort zone might be to be able to communicate, to be able to see your face, to be able to see your smile, to live a life that Jesus wanted us to live, who said, I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. Have we returned to that? And do we keep in prayer those who still find themselves in that throes of concern and paranoia? Another are those who still find it fashionable. Again, not to downplay people who have serious conditions that they need to look out for, but when people find certain things fashionable, it diminishes that seriousness. For example, about 20 years ago, it was popular to be lactose intolerant. About 10 years ago, it was popular to be gluten-free. Now today, it's popular to say, no, I'm immunodeficient. And again, not to downplay the seriousness of those who are, but we know people who just love to grab on to the latest fashionable health concern. And then, of course, for whom it is merely psychological. It reminds me of the scene from Jaws. You remember seeing the scene from Jaws, where the mayor says to Sheriff Brody, it's all psychological. You say barracuda, and everyone says, huh? What? You yell shark. And we got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July. A sitcom from the 80s, I remember, of a girl, I forget the name of it, but a teenage girl, she'd just broken up with her teenage boyfriend. Her neighbor, another boy her age, has a crush on her. And the ex-boyfriend and the neighbor are coming to her saying, you can't date someone else. What are you talking about? You belong with me. No, you belong with me. Well, who are you dating anyway? And she says, a guy named Clutch. Whereupon they both go, After she leaves to meet Clutch, the dad walks over to the boys who's looking at the door and he just goes, Clutch? And they go, just the name gets them to panic. And we kind of see it today, and it can often be funny. Again, not to downplay those who've experienced it, but where are we today? What is the person sick of? Oh, they have a very, very serious case of the flu. Oh, that's too bad. I get some rest, hope they feel better soon. What do they have? Well, they have a mild case of COVID. Did they get tested? Well, I just told you they had COVID. Obviously they did. I'm a Pisces myself. You have COVID, I'm a Pisces or a Capricorn. And again, we see still some who want to keep themselves in that throes of paranoia and a less of the living that we are called to be as a people of faith. And yet, 3 years later, we now hear this gospel. And what does it say to us as we go through this season of Lent, having the last time we heard it, we were in those extreme throes of lockdown and fear and paranoia. Of course, now, the United Nations, for what that's worth, is now saying in the World Health Organization, the emergency is now over. Well, I think a lot of people have figured that out a long time ago. We don't need politicians and United Nations officials to let us know that we can get on with our lives. But let us see that in hearing this gospel again today. We were experiencing a serious death of sorts, a spiritual death in many ways, deprived of the Eucharist, deprived of gathering as a community of faith to worship God. But has that time and that sickness ended in death? Or do we see brought forth the glory of God and the yearning that people have had for the Eucharist and the community of faith to which they belong, just to simply live and communicate and be a community of people in public once again? Do we hear Jesus telling us, move that stone from the entrance of the cave? Do we hear him say to us, faithful Christian, come out? Let us hear that message as we hear this gospel again in this season of Lent 2023, and especially as we prepare to celebrate the resurrection in just a few weeks. Next week is Palm Sunday, in 2 weeks it's Easter, and we have 50 days from Easter to Pentecost to celebrate the resurrection of Christ. in which we celebrate on Pentecost the invisible Spirit that gives us life, rather than fixate on an invisible virus that brings us death. Let us hear that voice of Christ again in this story of Lazarus, so familiar and yet so relevant to us spiritually over the last few years. Let us hear Jesus cry out to us. And as we wrap up these last few weeks of Lent, let us continually hear him to tell us, "Come out. I came that you may have life and have it more abundantly." And then we can go forth in this season of Easter, having put the pandemic behind us, while still, again, taking what precautions for health in any concern, in any matter that could jeopardize people who are vulnerable, that people who could get sick, that we behave responsibly when we are sick and not show up at Mass with a mask with a flu, as someone once told me recently. "Oh, don't shake my hand, Father, I have the flu." "Well, why are you?" "Well, I'm wearing my mask." Okay. But that we go forth from this season of Lent, entering into the meditation of our own sinfulness and mortality, but going from there to a 50-day celebration of resurrection. And spiritually, as well as a community of faith, putting that period of death behind us, hearing Christ's call to all of us to come out, remove the stone from the entrance to the tomb. And we go forth, truly preparing ourselves in this time of Lent to enter into the 50 days of Easter, truly celebrating the theme that's at the center and heart of Easter, resurrection and life that Jesus has given us by his sacrifice on the cross and the great miracle of life that we celebrate for 50 days of Easter.